The back of the plane is for economy class. However, currently the plane is packed, so you'll have to sit. Wait here, Olivia Hart remarked, her voice full of disdain, with a hint of scorn that made others laugh from a few people in business class. Rachel. Monroe didn't say anything and settled into a 1-2F, but when the plane stopped, F-22 at Andrews Air Force Base, the squadron commander suddenly stopped, stared her in the eye and said in a loud voice, "Midnight Viper, get up." Yes, minutes later, every F-22 pilot was on the runway, rose up straight, and saluted her, leaving everyone in the cabin speechless. Rachel's fingers were steady as Shepard, her boarding pass in her pocket off her old gray hoodie. The airport, had been a loud whirl of sound and moving. But now in this crowded aircraft, Tooth of Stairs in D.C. felt sharper and more in purpose. She wore her hoodie, and cuffs were worn out from years of wear, and there was a minor tear in the knee of the jeans, not really obvious, unless you appeared like they were seeking for weaknesses. Everyone was. She walked down the tiny aisle, being careful not to touch her, making sure not to touch etheric carry-ons that lined the way like trophies. A woman in a crisp blazer, her jewelry shining in Thekabin lights, looked up from her fin and flashed a brief, dismissing smile. Ah, man in a pinstripe suit with a T-bent near his neatly knotted looks like she lost her seatmate. "Way to the bus station," he said, just that Rachel might hear it. She didn't move. Her steps stayed, even her eyes were on the row numbers above. She didn't come here to prove anything. She just had to go to D.C. the Coben had, the kind of intensity that made it come alive feel when people assume they're better than youth and all the other people. Class 4 business passengers drank free beverages. Their laughter was sharp and confident. Rachel slid into the window seat, 12F, and put her old backpack under thigh in front of the seat. It was an ancient thing, army green, with a patch from a base Shay hadn't seen in a long time. The man next to her in her mid-40s with a Rolex that shouted new money gave her a quick look over before going back to his tablet. His name badge said Richard Hale, and the cologne was strong enough to make her blink. She didn't care. She had learned a long time ago. She learned to let judgment roll off her. She had brown, wavy hair that was pulled back in. Her hair was in a loose ponytail and her face was exposed. No signs of makeup. She seemed like she could have been a college student, scrapping be someone who might have gotten agreement at the last minute. But Rachel wasn't simply a new. Her paperwork was hidden away in some of the confidential vault said she was a reserve. Get people to join. Didn't say what the mission was. She had flown for SEAL Team 6, her theater's charge. They came after no one dared to say anything in these situations about. As Rachel got comfortable in her seat, a young woman in a pretty black outfit, her hair was arranged in lovely waves as she leaned from the row behind. The name tag for her read Jessica Lang, and her voice had a tenderness that didn't come from practice ego to her eyes. "You must be really happy to be on a plane like this," she said, her voice full of sadness, like Rachel Swaz, a poor person who had never flown before. A few people turned their heads, catching the comment, and a quiet wave of laughter spread. Rachel's fingertips stopped on her water bottle, her thumb caressing the cap. She turned a little, and her eyes meeting Jessica's for a short while. "It's just a flight," she remarked, her voice calm and solid, like a rock falling into calm water. Jessica's smile faded, and she sat back, using a hoof to flip her hair. Rochelle turned back to the window, her grasp on unaltered. But her facethe container got tighter, just enough to bend the plastic. "Hey, before we go any further, could you please do me a quick please pick up your phone and hit that like, press the button, and leave a remark? Below, let me know where you're watching from, or what this narrative makes you feel. Ever been looked down on or pushed aside? This one is for you. If you want more, if you want to hear more tales like these, hit subscribe. It means a lot to be able to share this occasion with. Okay, let's keep on. But the first thing that happened was that the plane hadn't even taxied yet. Olivia Hart, the head flight attendant, stood in the front of the plane. Attendant stood in the front of Thekabin, her pressed uniform to perfection, her smile as tight as a wire. She was in her 40s and had keen eyes that sized people up in seconds, and talked to Nathan. It could cut without raising. She'd looked at Rachel's boarding pass. They decided how much she was worth. Economy class in, Olivia said in the rear, her words dripping with just the right amount of scorn tossing. The man in the striped suit, Richard Hale, leaned over to talk to you. His friend, a guy with a cool haircut and a gold cufflink. Probably one of those cufflink. Most likely one of them people who buy discount tickets, Richard continued, not even trying to lower his voice. Rachel's fingers stopped moving on her backpack. For a second, then she zipped it back up, putting everything away slowly and carefully, like she was counting how many times she breathed. A woman across aisle, her nails painted a shiny red, chuckled quietly. Rachel didn't just move her seat higher, belt her hand steady. The plane, the buzz of the climbed into the sky, the engine settling into a steady hum. Rachel looked out. The window and sods, the clouds moved by like waves. Her hands were resting on her lap, which were rough from years of holding onto controls and cockpits most people would never see. The woman Tara Wells, with her shiny nails, leaned toward her companion, who had blonde hair and a silk scarf that smelt like an expensive perfume. Bet she's scared to sit next to fragrance. I bet she's terrified to sit in Earth emergency exit. Said her Granacho's lips were keen enough to cut glass, curved into a weak smile, yet she didn't turn her head. She merely reached for her water bottle, taking off the lid with a cautious, careful turn. Tara's friend laughed in a loud, piercing way that echoed in the cabin. Rachel didn't say anything, or looking at the horizon like she was searching for something that no one else could see. Olivia, during the meal service, stopped by Rachel's row and held a tray off menus for business class. She looked at Rachel's sweater, and then she gave the menu to Richard. Hale smiled and said, "I'm sorry. We only have enough for our premium passengers," she remarked, her voice lewd enough to make her eyes flicker to Rachel with a hint of condescension. A dude in a custom blazer 2 rows up turned back his chuckle, which was low and sarcastic. "Don't worry, she's probably used to it." "Fast food," he replied, his voice streaming with laughter. The cabin shook with Rachel's hand stopped moving, and she laughed. Her water bottle, she looked up at Horea's, and for a brief moment, they met Olivia's. "Water's fine," she answered, her voice quiet but strong, like a line-painted nth beach. Olivia blinked and was caught off guard, then clicked her heels and moved on. Rachel leaned back and went faster than previously. Her fingers tapped once against their rest. A modest, controlled movement that said more than words. Hours went by, and the cabin settling into a cadence of clinking whispered discussions and drinks. Rachel sipped her water and moved around. Exactly. Like someone who had been trained must keep calm when things are tough. Richard Hale kept looking at her, his eyes narrowed like he was trying to figure it out finally. He stated his mind to her, full of disdain. "You look like you're going to a job interview or something." "I hope you have a better." Rachel moved her head to look at the clothes in that bag, head just enough to see his eyes. "I'm good," she remarked in a quiet voice, steady like a knife going into place. Richard blinked, confused, and then said something about youngsters these days, then went back to his tablet. He said a few words, and then went back to his tablet. Rachel turned back to the window. Her face was unreadable, yet her fingers brushed the edge of her seatbelt, moving it around a little. The captain's voice broke up over the intercom. Breaking, the people were stopping for a little break from the boredom. At Andrews Air Force Base to fill up, it shouldn't take long. Rachel's head went up a little, her eyes getting sharper as she looked out at the military runway coming into view. The tarmac was full of jets. Their smooth outlines shone in the light as people moved with purpose in the sun below. Her fingers clenched around her water bottle for just a second before she put it down. Olivia, who was standing Rachel's posture, changed, and someone close noticed. "Something catch your eye?" she asked, her voice sounding more skeptical than Rachel didn't answer immediately away. She just kept looking at her hand. She continued glancing out her hand and away. Still in her lap, like she was looking at something that no one else could. As the jet went down, approaching Andrews, a businessman in a clean white shirt, his with his cufflinks shining, rose up to Gethys' suitcase from the overhead bin, hello, at Rachel, and then spoke loudly, to not one person in particular. "Some people don't AID, don't know their position, do they?" he said, his voice sounding smug. A few passengers nodded their heads and smiled. Understanding, Rachel's gaze darted to him for only a moment before going back tooth glass. She moved about in her seat, her backpack sliding a little against her. "I know where I am," she murmured, her legs so quiet that he could scarcely hear it, but the weight of it made him stop. Heck cleared his throat and became fascinated all of a sudden in his luggage and sat down without saying another word. The cabin got quieter, and the air full of silent stress. A man in business class, with his tie loose, and his voice was loud as he leaned over his seat. His name tag said Mark Ellison, and Hugh with a smirk that said Hugh was used to being the loudest in their room. "What? You want to fly a plane?" he said. His chuckle was piercing and cruel. A few people laughed out loud, like needles in the air. Rachel turned hers, lowly turned her head, her black gaze locking in Tohis. "I've worked close to planes before," she said. Her voice was quiet but strong, like Itha. Door clicked shut. "At?" Mark's smile stuttered, and he moved in his chair, instantly interested in his drink. Olivia lifted an eyebrow but didn't say anything. She walked down the aisle. Her shoes clicked sharply like she was marking the time. When the plane went, it landed at Andrews. The cabin's vibe changed. The class of business passengers perked up and changed. They're checking their phones and putting on jackets like they were going to get inside a meeting room. Olivia's voice came through Thintarcom, clear and professional. Some passengers have been asked to get to know the F-22 pilots on the tarmac. Please stay seated unless you've been notified. She looked at Rachel as Cha spoke, and her eyes made it plain how wasn't on the list. Rachel stayed still. She drank some more water. Her face deadpan like she knew it all before. Her fingers touched the edge of her backpack, which had a little piece. A fading bird caught the light for a moment before she put it away, out of sight. Tara Wells moved closer to her friend, and her voice was loud enough to hear. "They probably don't want to take pictures with Simona, who looks like that," she said, her laugh hard and often. It's a blonde in silk scarf, with a name tag that said Donovan. Nodded, and her lips curled into a smirk. There was a low laugh from the row up ahead. A guy in a fancy polo, Ethan Carter, was looking through his sneer could be seen even from his Rachel's chair. She didn't look up. Shaggy's put the cap back on her water bottle. Her movement was sluggish, and in purpose, as if she were measuring that time. The cabin felt heavier now, that are dense with judgment that didn't need to be bespoken, as the people who were invite put their things together. And a woman in designer clothing, pungent perfume, and floral, stopped by Rachel's row. She gazed down at Rachel, her eyes getting a little smaller, and talked to Olivia Ann, a whisper on stage. "You would think they should check people better before they fly. Like this," she continued, her voice pouring with contempt. Olivia gave a small nod. She pursed her lips and gave the woman a free drink. Rachel's hands resting on her backpack, her fingers brushing the eagle patch that had lost its color. She looked up at the woman and met her eyes. "Just a split second. Screening isn't my problem," she remarked in a quiet voice. "Even appreciate a quiet challenge." The lady froze her drink halfway to her mouth. Then she rushed back to her seat. Rachel leaned back, her look the same, but her fingertips tapped thermrest, a slight movement that was within control. Rachel's gaze darted to the window, where the F-22s kept guard over the runway. Her fingers were still for a moment, stopped, pausing. Over the patch on Hera backpack, she'd swung it on herself years after, a mission that made her hands shake, but kept her squadron safe. Shaking. But her squadron was still alive. The memory arrived without being asked. A night sky that was lighted by the sound of engines and tracer fire, weight of choices that no one should have had do. She blinked, and the recollection. She pulled her hoodie tighter and adjusted it. The sleeves over her hands, and sat back in her chair. The cabin's talk sounded far away, like static on our radio. Major Kyle Bennett stepped into his cabin for business class, his uniform sharp of his presence like a storm coming in. He was in his late 30s and had a jawline that appeared like it had been chiseled out of stone and eyes that didn't miss a thing. He said, "Helith, Nice passengers who were invited shake hands with Richard Hale and nod Tara Wells. But then he saw Rachel was sitting calmly in 12F. He stopped moving, his hands still holding the finale handshake. But Rachel Dezo dislocated. Did at first, though. She looked him in the eye. Her face stayed the same, as if she had been waiting for this time. Her hands brushed the edge of her seat, which was little motion of grounding. Bennett went for a walk, directly to her row, his boots heavy against the ground. Are you Shadowhawk? 12, he questioned in a quiet voice, nearly respectful. Rachel nodded. Slightly, her never taking her eyes off of him. Richard Hale he softly snorted, as if he thought it was a joke. Bennett's jaw tensed, but hadn't taken his eyes off Rachel. I'm sorry for making you sit here, he said. Repeated it loudly now so everyone in the cabin could hear. You're invited to the tarmac right away. Rachel jumped up and slung her. She had a rucksack over one shoulder. Her movements were fluid and exact. It's like Shehave done this 100 times before. There were whispers all across the cabin, but Shehave didn't look back. Rachel followed Bennett approaching the door. A man in a navy his watch shone under the cabin lights as he sat in a suit. Lights leaned out of his seat. This has to be a mistake, he added, his voice confident and loud, like he was speaking to a boardroom. She doesn't seem like someone important. A few people on board nodded, and their whispers got louder. Rachel's steps didn't slow down, but her hand tightened on the strap of her bag. Her knuckles turned white for a second. She moved her head a little, and her eyes meeting his. Looks can be deceiving, she remarked, her voice gentle yet harsh like a knife slithering through silk. The man he opened and closed his mouth and sat down. Return. His confidence went down. Bennett's gaze darted to the man. A nonverbal warning bore. He took Rachel outside. Outside, the air was harsh with jet fuel and wind. Rachel stepped onto the runway, her hoodie moving a little bit. The F-22 to the pilots stood in a straight line. Their outfits were neat. Their expressions were hard to decipher. Bennett's voice broke the silence. Listen up. This is Midnight Viper Thessomian who used to lead 3 squadrons through Anomi skies. The pilots quickly got to work. Attention, their hands going up in perfect in unison to greet her. Rachel came back. The salute, her movements sharp, her calm but warm look on face. A small smile pulled at her lips as she dropped her hand. The wind took the moment, and the windows of the cabin were full of face-looking. Rachel's eyes moved to Thedget's, and for a time her shoulders softened as if she were home. Back on Theon the plane, things were different. Richel laughed and leaned back in his chair. Sounds like a story from Hollywood, he exclaimed, his voice cutting through the noise off motors. Olivia Forst, maybe it's just an honorary title, she said, smoothing her uniform. Title, she murmured as she smoothed up her outfit. Claire Donovan whispered to Tara, no way. It's Rachel said, but she didn't look at them. She merely stood by the window with her hands in her pockets. She saw the jets shining in the sun. Bennett looked across, and he had heard that the cottage was frigid. Every syllable. Rachel's fingers stroked the edge of her hoodie, a small grounding motion before. She turned back to Theta Mac. A young officer came up Toeth, an ancient flight helmet in hand. Did wasworn but in good shape. The name of the call boldly embroidered Midnight Viper lettering on the side. Bennett took it and gave it to Rachel. This helmet is only given to a pilot who finished a mission that was highly secret. He thought his voice was steady but loud enough, for the people in the cabin could hear. Rachel put on the helmet, her fingers following the sewing for armament. Then she put it on her actions that are as natural as breathing, that fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. A young pilot, not long out of was in his 20s, and stepped forward, his voice low. Hey, she saved my squadron. He said. The other pilots got their act together, their faces changing to something resembling wow. Rachel stood on the tarmac when a junior pilot, his face still young, came up to him slowly, with his hat on. Heck clutched a small worn logbook in, its hands-worn edges from use. You've signed, man? 3 years ago, he said, his voice breaking a little. He opened it. Toa page with her call sign and her signature clear and sharp. The other pilots looked away, their eyes softening with recognition. Rachel took the logbook, her fingers lightly touching the page. She knotted her lips together, making a real smile. "You made it through," she said in a soft, warm voice. The pilot's eyes gleamed, and he took a step back, saluting once more. The windows in the cottage were still full with faces, yet the air felt different now, like everything was heavy with something not said. Rachel took a step back, cantering the cabin with the helmet tucked beneath her arm. The people on board were quieter today, but not everyone was convinced. Olivia made herself grin, but her voice was tuneless. "Well, it's good to have a special guest," she added, but her eyes flicked to Rachel's dirty footwear. Ethan Carter folded his arms and said, low but clear. "Most likely just a pee," her mumbled. "Stunt." Rachel didn't answer. She just put her head down, a little, her fingers grazing the edge of the headgear. The cabin was divided. Some people were interested in her, while others were not. Doubt she didn't care either way. She settled back into 12F, had her backpack at her feet, and stared out the window as the plane got ready to take off. 8th. Flight attendant was younger than Olivia, came up to Rachel's row with a nervous smile. She had a little silver pin on her hand, eagle, and gave it to Rachel. "This is from the crew, because you know your service," she murmured, her voice breaking over the words. The cabin got quiet. Everyone was watching the exchange. Rachel looked at the pin, and then at the attendant face. She carefully looked at her. Finger sand stuck it to her backpack without Atha. Attendant smiled, and it was a true smile. This time, and rushed back to her. Ethan Carter moved in his seat at the seat, and the sneer on his face was gone. Rachel leaned back and looked out the window. The pin shone dimly in the cabin light. The jet taxied back to the runway, getting ready to take off. Rachel's fingers tapped softly on the helmet in her lap. A slow, steady beat. The captain's voice came via the intercom, but before he could finish, someone else yelled low. Forceful growl sliced through the sound. There were 2F, 2S. Next to the plane, the sun made their wings shine. The radio made Bennett's voice sound CRACKLY, plain for everyone to hear. At Midnight Viper, we never got to say thank you for Rachel, leaned toward the final time. Glass and her lips turned into a little. She smiled and pressed the headset she'd been given and talked in a calm voice. "Stay in formation, Eagle 1. There." Was an immediate response. A chorus of "Yes, ma'am," said the voices on the radio. The cabin went quiet, and Richard Hale froze, his drink halfway to his mouth. Tara Wells looked at her phone, and her finger Olivia's smile faded, and Shahan's fumbling with a tray. No one sighed. Die. The F-22 stayed in formation and led the plane as it rose into the air. God. Rachel sat back in her chair and looked at There were jets outside. The cabin was a different place now. No one looked at her the same. Mark Ellison, the loud guy with his tie, was slack, and he shifted around awkwardly. Claire Donovan's prior bravado is gone, said something to Tara in a low voice. But it was Rachel didn't need to hear it. She had heard enough. As the plane leveled off, a passenger in a fitted jacket, his face red, withers up, and walked over out of shame Rachel's fight. "I didn't know who you were," he fumbled, his voice low yet audible to others around him. "Anyone close may hear it." "I'm sorry for." Rachel looked up at what I stated before. Her gaze were steady but not cruel. She nodded once, a modest sign of understanding Gerster, and then went back to the window. The man stood there for a time, his fidgeting with his hands before going back to his yacht. The cabin felt smaller now, and the air was full of a mix of amazement and shame. Rachel's fingers brushed against the eagle pin. On her backpack, a gentle reminder of who she was. The flight to DC seemed shorter. The cabin stayed quiet after that. Previous talk was replaced by an uneasy Rachel, kept her eyes on the window, watching the F-22s fly away as the plane was almost ready to land. Her fingertips stroked the patch. On Hearth faded eagle on the backpack again, catching flight. She was 19 when she gotten. Flying a mission that was so secret her staff didn't realize how big the project was. The radio was shouting. The sky was a mess. With orders, but she had brought Theum home. All of them. She blinked, and the recollection vanished, and was replaced by the sight of the skyline of Washington, D.C., WHEN. The jet touched down. The passengers moved slowly, as if they were still thinking on what they had witnessed. There, with her backpack over her shoulder, and the helmet was tucked under hers, didn't hurry or stay too long. She just walked down the aisle, her step steady, with her head held high. Richard Hall avoided, looking her in the eye and pressed. His phone to his ear as he mumbled something about a meeting. Tara Wells was writing angry with a pale face. Olivia stood, her smile made her hands move near the door, gripped tightly in front of her. Rachel Shea didn't look at any of them, she merely keeping her sneakers quiet as she walked against the floor. A man was at the gate. He was tall, calm, and waiting. Presence that didn't need words. His clothing was simple but fitted well, and stared at Rachel the whole time she was there. He didn't say anything. Simplinated, and walked next to her. The people on the flight, who were still stayed at baggage claim, and got quiet. Ethan Carter dropped his phone while texting. Claire Donovan gazed at him without a sneer. Away, holding her scarf securely in her, Olivia kept herself busy. She was doing paperwork and her motions were choppy. No one needed to say his name. They knew who he, James Monroe, who was Rachel's husband, a guy whose power reached places most people couldn't even think of it. Before they, a young girl maybe, left the terminal. 10. Pulled on her mother's sleeve and pointed to Rachel and said, "Is that the pilot?" "Lady," she muttered with her eyes wide open. Dot. The mother, a calm woman, had been quiet during the flight. Looked at Rachel and nodded. "That's her," she whispered gently. Her voice, full of Rachel, caught the girl's eye and said, "Respect." Smiled a little like this thought. Said she saw her. The girl smiled back. Holding her mother's hand, Rachel's palm brushed against James as they held on tightly. They walked with the helmet still on their head sure arm, and the eagle pins shone dimly. There were a lot of people at the terminal, but they all left as they went by. It was like they could feel something more important than the worn-out hoodie and worn-out footwear. The results arrived fast, quietly, and without stopping. Richard Hale. The guy in the pinstripe suit was a mid-level manager at someone on the defense contractor's team flight, had taped everything he said, and the video went viral on the internet. He was out of a job by the next morning. His LinkedIn profile cleaned up. Tara Wells, influencer with shiny nails, found her most recent after the video. The sponsorship deal fell through, got viral. Her following fell by thousands overnight. Her post of apologized mothered by a deluge of comments that called her out. Olivia Hart had a Tara formal warning from Thierline for acting unprofessionally. Ash was given short. Domestic roots again. Her aspirations of flying over the world stuck to the ground for an unknown amount of time. Jessica Langschwin, they were on social media. They lost some of their presence. Her company cut ties with her, claiming inappropriate behavior. Ethan Carter's new business lost a big investor. The news broke gently, but clearly. Claire Donovan's law firm said sorry in public for what she died, and she was taken out of high profile. Ellison's consultancy firm handles cases took him off their list. His name taken off their website by the end of the week. Rachel didn't see any of this happen. She didn't have to. She'd been through harsher than their words missions, where the sky was on fire. One false move may have a meaning there was no way back. This was merely sounds. The type of noise she had Lornetto tune out a long time ago. And James strolled through the terminal, their steps in the sink. With the helmet still under her arm, the DC skyline stood out outside a reminder of why she was here. Not fourth passengers, not for the fame, but for something bigger, something that had always pushed her, even when Thea trying to make her little. In Thine, the end, Rachel stood at the brink of Theon the tarmac. With her husband next to her, the city, the wind was blowing in front of them, pulled on her hoodie. Tita took it tighter. She just stood there, steady like she always had. Been, the world had doubted her and made fun of her. Make her think she didn't fit in, but she wasn't small. She never was. Been, and for anyone who had ever been judged, ignored, or silenced, her the story was a gentle promise. You were never alone. Where are you? Where are you watching from? Please leave a comment below and hit follow to walk with me through heartbreak, treachery, and eventual getting better.